So can I start by welcoming very warmly Julian Perkins? We're very pleased to welcome him to SWEMF. Julian, as most of you will know, is well known as a wonderful keyboard player, a singer, a coach of singers, and a musical director. And it's in that last capacity, really, I think, that he's speaking this afternoon, particularly about his groundbreaking work with the Cambridge Handel Opera. I've thought for a long time, as I think many of us have, that Handel operas are just not seen and heard enough. So it's wonderful to have an organisation of such quality which is devoted to bringing his work alive and to a wider audience. So without more ado, I will hand over to Julian.
Thank you very much, Claire, and it's nice to see you all, albeit online. Thank you for your interest in what I'm doing. So great, yes, a lovely introduction there from Claire. So in terms of what is Cambridge Handel Opera? Well, it's quite rare in the world of Handel performance, I think. The clues in the title, it puts on Handel operas in Cambridge, but it's quite rare in putting on stage productions of Handel's operas in which what we aim for is a creative synergy between historical stagecraft and period performance practice, and also bringing in relevant scholarship. So it's promoted as part of our productions. So we try and see a sort of fluid interplay between the stage, the opera pit, and also the latest scholarship. And we're blessed, I live in London, but we're blessed in Cambridge by having many leading scholars who advise us on how best to go about what we do in a way that the scholarship comes alive. Now, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do in this chat is give an overview of what goes into putting on an opera production. I was speaking to a friend last night, and I said it's like 3-dimensional chess, and they said no, it's more like 5-dimensional chess, whatever that is. So I think it'd be good to share with you what we do, and then after that, I'm going to sort of give my view as artistic director of what my input is into each production. So first the overview, and then my input. And as Claire says, please do ask questions as we go along. So in terms of the sort of chronological sequence of putting on an opera, how does it happen? Well, it starts quite a long time before the lights go down on the first night. It starts with a mundane thing. It's always the elephant in the room. It's about money. So we agree, very first thing, about 2 years before the production, on the budget, the timing of the production, and the venue. And these are all, essential. I mean, obviously you need the budget. I remember when I started Cambridge Handel Opera, I was thinking, oh, how difficult could it be? You just put on an opera. But, we went for about sort of 10 revisions of the budget when we first started. I had to learn very quickly, how much a makeup artist might cost, or what is a sensible budget for scenery. I don't need to be an expert at these things, but to have an overview of it is essential. So it's been a sort of vertical learning curve, if you like. A very pleasurable one, but it's been good for my grey cells, if you like. So the budget, the timing, we try and do a diary clash at Cambridge Handel Opera. I mean, there will always be clashes, won't there? But you want to avoid putting on because in Cambridge, of course, there's the Academy of Ancient Music and Cambridge Early Music, amongst many other things. So we don't want to put on a Handel opera at the same time that the Academy of Ancient Music might be putting on Acis and Galatea. That would be rather foolish. So we start with looking at the budget, the timing, and the venue. And we're blessed in Cambridge by having a delightful theatre we perform at in the Lees, which is very near the Fitzwilliam Museum. It's a very intimate theatre where we can emphasize the fact that what we're doing is essentially large-scale chamber music. So that's point one, the budget, the timing, and the venue. So we sort of say in 2 years' time, we're going to put on Tamerlano. It was actually 4 years ago. We were supposed to put on Tamerlano in 2020, but for some strange reason, circumstances prevailed, and we're putting it on next April. So, and then what's the first thing I do after all of this? And I think the first thing to do, once you've agreed on what you're going to do, is for me as artistic director, stroke music director, is to fix the stage director. And of course, this is a very important thing. The stage director and the music director are like the two parents of an opera, the mummy and the daddy or whatever. So they need to work together with a common vision. And I mean, books could be written about the nuanced relationship between stage directors and music directors. It can go horribly wrong. It doesn't with Cambridge Handel Opera, well, touch wood. But we have to make sure that we have a common vision. And the stage director is coming back to stage director. I mean, Handel operas can be quite dangerous animals, because I remember once hearing about a production where the stage director came along to a first rehearsal for a Handel opera, and he couldn't understand why the opera was an hour and a half longer than he had anticipated. And he didn't know about the Da Capo aria. The aria when you have the A section, the B section, then you repeat yourself. So it was made for rather an interesting conversation with a music director. Now, that hasn't happened with Cambridge Handel Opera, I assure you. But it does go to show the importance. For me, one of the important things as a stage director is someone who is conversant in music. And I'm delighted to say that for the stage director for our production of Tamerlano is the Greek prodigy Dionysius Kyropoulos. He's based in London. He's a professor of stagecraft at the Guildhall. And he was also a singer, which is a real blessing for a stage director to actually understand the physicality of making music. There are lots of stage directors who come from the world of theatre directors. A lot of them are truly brilliant. But sometimes I hear it's a challenge, sometimes they don't understand about the physicality of singing. So with Dionysius, for this production of Tamerlano, we're great that we have someone who was a singer and is also an expert in period stagecraft. Not a term I really like, it's just good stagecraft, I call it. More about that in a moment. So the stage director is the second stage. And then after that comes the casting of singers, or in the case of Tamerlano, singers and actors. We have a cast of 6 singers and 3 actors. Now, casting singers is a dark art. It's not just about putting your best friends together or the so-called best sort of singers available for the budget. It doesn't really work like that. For a start, my belief in casting singers is there has to be a sort of a credible variety of age ranges. You don't want somebody's daddy to be younger than the daughter. I suppose there are occasions when that can work. There has to be a very good makeup artist. There has to be a sense of, and what we do in Cambridge Handel Opera, one of the great strengths of this charity is that we have all our opera projects are like one big education program as well. We have young artists working alongside older professionals, and we have that in our cast. So, for instance, the Emperor Bayezid is Christopher Turner, who is an esteemed tenor who's in his late 40s, and then his daughter, I imagine in real life is in her late 20s. So, he'd be quite young to be a father at that age, but there is a sort of credible age gap between the characters. And I think that's really important. So we're talking about young singers in their early 20s and more established singers working alongside each other. And that, I think, gives a really good dynamic, because you have a sort of freshness of youth with the relative experience of, slightly older people. And when we did Rodelinda in 2018, I found that to be a really positive dynamic. And when I go back in a minute to talk more about how I work with singers, I'll tell you how we choose our singers. And then once we cast our singers, we fix the instrumentalists. And our orchestra is made up of professionals from my group, Sounds Baroque, working alongside advanced music students. So therein again is like a sort of apprenticeship program, and it seems to work very well. We perform on Baroque instruments at pitch 415, and I always start by fixing the core players. So in Cambridge Handel Opera, the professional players are the leader, the first violinist, or concertmaster as they're sometimes referred to, and the leader of the second violins, the continuo cellist, the theorbo player, one of the oboe players, and the double bass player. Those are the sort of the nucleus, if you like. And I'll talk to you in a minute about why I've chosen those instruments as the nucleus for the orchestra to work with the advanced students. So I've chosen the stage director, casting of singers has been completed, fixing of instrumentalists has been completed. So what next? Well, as I'm sure you can gather, it's going to be the preparation of the edition from which we will be working, the edition, and in Cambridge Handel Opera, the translation. At the moment, we perform our pieces in English. The advantages and disadvantages are much discussed about this sort of thing. I think it's the right thing for Cambridge Handel Opera at the moment. It doesn't rule out performing in Italian in the future. And actually, there was quite an interesting discussion a few years ago about doing macaronic operas, because of course when Handel was very young, I think it was his first opera Almeda, the recitatives were in German and the arias were in Italian, and there was a historical precedent for this, is what I'm saying. So I wonder whether it'd be good to have recitatives in English and then arias in Italian. Part of me wonders whether it'd be too much of a distraction for the audience, but I'm told by people who've been to those sort of things that they get used to it, and that might be a way forwards in the future. Watch this space. But for Tamerlano in April 2022, it will be in English, in a translation based upon that by Dr. Andrew Jones. Now, Andrew Jones is a key figure in Cambridge Handel Opera because some of you might know that Cambridge Handel Opera is a phoenix in a way. There was a previous organisation in Cambridge called the Cambridge Handel Opera Group, a separate organisation. Cambridge Handel Opera today is a new charity, but we base a lot of our principles on those of Cambridge Handel Opera Group. And Andrew Jones is a leading international Handel scholar, a superb editor amongst many other things, and he very kindly allows us to use his base auditions upon his translations. So that is a real blessing. And that's what we do when we prepare our editions. I speak to Andrew, and he advises me at great length about the editions. One of the things I've got a real bee in my bonnet about, well, it's going to become a bit of a soapbox now, perhaps. I find, I'll put my head on the line here, I find that vocal scores of Handel operas are rarely useful. I always say to singers, sing from the full score, because we're talking about a relatively simple textures. It's not a piece of Strauss where you can have, like, one page for 3 bars of music. It's utterly essential that the singer knows what's going on in the orchestra. So if they've got an aria where there's a bassoon who is sort of shadowing them, they have to know this. Or, an accompanied recit, they need to know where the string players are in relation to them, so they have a clear sense of how they need to lead the music through their breath. I'll talk about this more later, and I'd love to know if anyone's got an alternative point of view, because I would love to make this a discussion as well. But I do emphatically say that vocal scores in Handel operas are something I'm very reticent about. In oratorios, it's slightly different because you've got a whole chorus, and they will need probably to be performing from vocal scores for practical reasons, because of the page turns. But in opera, it's different, I think. More about that later. So for preparation, the edition, of course, that has to be up and running very quickly. And then I need to discuss with Dionysius, about the rehearsals. And then what we do with Cambridge Handel Opera, we try and start the rehearsal process early on. One of the challenges of opera is that if you meet the singers, say 3 or 4 weeks before curtain comes down, it can be just too late to make any changes. There are some singers who are always adaptable, and there are others, once they've learnt the music, you can't change what they're doing for love or money, and you're stuck. So we're blessed with Cambridge Handel Opera, and we have a sort of, what we do, Dionysius does workshops early on in Baroque gesture. Claire's going to share some slides with us later about that. And I put on chamber concerts, fundraising concerts, essentially with the singers. And that's a great way of getting to know the singers. They might often sing an aria or two from the opera in that concert, as well as some of Handel's continuo cantatas, which are like mini operas for just continuo and the singer. So it avoids the opera production being like one big blind date, because that, musically, creatively speaking, is a disaster. So we are performing in April. Dionysius did some Baroque gesture workshops back in, I think, November. And it's rather atypical, this production, because we started the whole process in 2018. But in the normal course of events, had the production not been postponed, I would have been performing chamber concerts with a number of the singers for about a year beforehand. And that is such a blessing. So the preparation involves the audition, workshops, chamber concerts, and of course the things like the figuring up of parts, which I'm going to talk about at length later, and the discussion of ornaments, which I'll also talk about. So that's the preparation. So say that all of that's cooking. I mean, when I say the preparation, you're never finished with preparation, are you? It's an ongoing thing. But so that's continual. And then alongside Cambridge Handel Opera's productions are our education events. Now, this is a very unique and strong aspect of Cambridge Handel Opera's work, because we have a variety of education programs which appeal to various ages. We've got, it might not be possible for Tamerlano because of restrictions in schools at the moment, but for Rodelinde, we had a great time working with the local maintained schools, Parkside, doing hands-on workshops where we sort of learn. I brought in my harpsichord and they got to play on it and explore how that felt different for them playing the piano. And a Baroque violinist came in with her modern violin as well and showed what the differences were between the two instruments. And a singer came in and warbled away happily with showing how passages of music can be ornamented and what that means. Why do we ornament? And we would love to develop this work with school children wherever possible. And what we're going to do is we have an open dress rehearsal for local schools as well. So what are our other things we do? Well, as I've said earlier, we have this apprenticeship scheme in the orchestra where professionals work alongside students, and that feeds through into the production team. So Dionysius has an assistant stage director who I believe is somebody he knew as a student. He's a recent graduate. I think so. Anyway, that is a really useful thing for them. And then alongside him, a production team, there will be people working, say, in the lighting and the props, who will be working alongside professionals to know about how things work, essentially. So the apprenticeship scheme and the production is the second thing. And then we have what is a new thing, which has come about because of COVID, and it's Handel's Green Room, we've called it. And these are online forums which are chaired by our esteemed Handel ambassador, Ruth Smith, who I can see on my screen. And these are where we sort of go under the bonnet and we explore particular things with regards to the production which is coming up. So we've had our first series last year, and we've got our next series coming up very shortly, which would be delighted if you wanted to join us for that. Details of it are on our website, and Claire's kindly going to provide details of that at the end of the chat. So in the Handel's Green Room, for instance, I'm going to be talking to a player in the next season, Jamie Akers, our theorbo player, about continuo playing. What is it we do as continuo players? How do we decide to use the instruments we have at our disposal to serve the music as best we can? And I've got a musical example I'm going to share with you a little bit later. So Handel's Green Room is quite an exciting thing, which is born out of necessity, but I think it's going to sort of stay with us after COVID, or alongside COVID, whichever world we live in the future. And related to Handel's Green Room is our study afternoon, which was something which was started with Cambridge Handel Opera Group and Andrew Jones back in the 90s, I think. And that is a wonderful thing. It's on the final Saturday of the project for final performance day, where some esteemed scholars come together, and I and the stage director come alongside as well, and singers, and we talk about particular aspects of the opera. So when we did Rodelinda, Andrew Jones gave a very inspiring talk about different versions of arias in the opera and how those compositional changes Handel did informed his creative processes. And the countertenor, Larry Zazo, who's actually one of our trustees now, very successful countertenor and a scholar, came in and he talked about aspects of performing. And I believe he'll be joining us for Handel's Green Room as well, because he sang the role of Tamerlano. So he'll be talking again for us, and he's a real firecracker of a person. He's a really energetic and inspiring person, so do join us for that. So yeah, the study afternoon is the final strand. So just to clarify our education events for school children, the young, and then apprenticeship schemes within the orchestra and the production team, and even in the cast, is our second strand. And then the third strand is for Handel's Green Room and the study afternoon. So those three things, I think it's a very inspiring way to make sure it instills a sense of exploration amongst all the participants, to have a sense of everyone's learning together from it. So that's the educational angle we take with Cambridge Handel Opera. And then, of course, there are endless logistics associated with putting on a staged Handel Opera. I've just listed a few in front of me. I'll read them through. So publicity, the program, the ticketing, the dressing rooms, the props, the costumes, the staging, the makeup, the stewarding, and also, of course, the orchestral layout and the pit. I don't know if you managed to have a look at that video that Claire kindly forwarded of our production in 2018. You wouldn't have noticed that we had an orchestral layout perhaps different to what you're familiar with. And actually, that layout is what was common in the 18th century. It's known as, it was popular like in Drottningham. And it allows, it's a bit like sort of on the stage, it allows the bass section to be heard on either side of the stage, because you have me on one side of the stage right, directing from one harpsichord, and on the other side of the stage, you've got the other harpsichord, and each of us have our own set of continuo players with us. So it's like sort of Baroque sound, what do you call it? Surround sound, Baroque surround sound for the orchestra, and it means that the second violins also are playing out. And then the first violins, who can always be heard more anyway, are playing in, but they can see the stage from where they're sitting. So I'd love to know your reactions to that setup, because I found it really inspiring. And well, I'm blessed that another strong association we have with Cambridge Handel Opera is the scholar and performer Peter Holman, who has always advised me about these things. And he was playing harpsichord with me for Rodelinda, actually. And for the recording we did of John Eccles' Semele, he's a really very, his knowledge is so deep. It's great to have him on board. He was our chairman when we started out. So those are the various logistics I've outlined. And then this is the last thing on my list before I go into more detail, is the scheduling. Now, I mentioned it was like three-dimensional chess plus. So you need to, one of the important things I've learned with Cambridge Handel Opera, one has to delegate as artistic director. So I have to trust, people when I talk to the lighting crew, I don't know much about lighting, I admit it, but I know people who do know about lighting. So you just delegate responsibilities of the production to the company manager and the production team, so that the lighting, the props, the costumes, I don't have a direct involvement, but I'm aware of what's going on. But one thing which struck me when we did Rodelinda, there was a sort of a momentary challenge, I should say, when I was tuning the harpsichord in the pit, before our dress rehearsal actually, and there was an almighty racket going along above my head when somebody up in the gods was fixing the scaffolding for the lighting, and we just the thing is, there's no reason a lighting crew should know about the needs for harpsichord tuning, but harpsichord tuning, as we all know, needs to be done in relative quiet. So there had to be a discussion and a revision, or no, I shouldn't say revision, a tweak of the timetable, so that there was space allotted for lighting and space allotted for harpsichord tuning. Those sort of things are so important to understand when putting together the schedule. We're not just talking about putting together a music rehearsal. You need to understand about how the get-in times for the stage crew, the requirements of each party, so that everything works together harmoniously. And in terms of talking about harmoniously, I mean, one of the things working with singers is what they do is obviously very physical. So as instrumentalists, we can often have 3 rehearsals a day, 3 session days, as they're called. That's not usually a problem. It's something I'm quite happy to do. But with singers, it's not necessarily acceptable. So you have to devise timetables where you use singers without them having to wait around for 3 hours. It's just quite inspiring seeing the knitting earlier, because I know a lot of opera singers who knit, because it's a great way to pass the time. Easier than reading a book, because they might be sort of sitting in a rehearsal room for 2 hours, and then suddenly called to sort of sing an aria about devastating love or something. And knitting, I don't knit myself, but it's seen as a great sort of thing to do for a lot of musicians. Yes, there, I can see you, Lynn, knitting. So you're in good company. Colin Davis was a great knitter, apparently. I remember him saying, I love knitting, but the symphonies get him away. So there we go. So I've given an overview. There are obviously things I've missed out because there's so many nuances of opera, but I've just sort of given you my understanding of an overview. So what I'd love to share with you now, and do stick up your hands if you want to make this a discussion. I'll go into more detail about what my input is creatively as artistic director. I think at this point, I should maybe just talk a little bit about Tamerlano, for those of you who might be less familiar with it. What is this opera about? Well, I'm going to quote the publicity on our website. It's basically Handel's most intensely psychological opera, where paternal heartache, royal status, and thwarted love and frustrated passion collide to devastating effect. So we have a fallen emperor, Bayezid, who is the tenor, Christopher Turner. He cannot come to terms with his humiliation at defeat. He's never encountered this sort of defeat before. Well, he's never encountered defeat like this. So there's Bayezid and his daughter, Asteria. He cannot let his daughter fall into the hands of his presumptuous victor, who is Tamerlano, who will be the countertenor Jamie Lang. Now, Asteria, who is Bayezid's daughter, she loves Andronico, but his love for her is paralyzed by his duty to his ally, her father's conqueror. So there again we have conflicted emotions. So we have familial love clashing with proud hatred of an enemy, and it has tragic consequences. Can resolution ever be found? So this opera probes dilemmas of loyalty, identity, family, and yearning. And I think it's especially apt for our sort of continued state of uncertainty today. But it's an utterly masterly score. The music is spellbinding. It really is. And it's also very intense drama. I mean, the scoring is often described as a claustrophobic opera, because the scoring in the orchestra, you don't get any lipstick in the orchestra, you don't get the trumpets or horns. It's very much string orientated. There's a wonderful exception where Irene, showing her royalty, has an aria of 2 period clarinets. And we do have clarinetista. We do have 2 period clarinetists joining us for that aria. And interestingly enough, the aria was originally, there's been a misunderstanding about the scoring for this, because the first version of the aria, Cornetti was the instruction in the score for Irene. So sometimes it's done with cornetti and sometimes it's done with clarinets. And I think it's one of only 3 times that Handel used clarinets. The other time was Riccardo Primo was one, and the other one escapes me. But it's a wonderful use of scoring because it shows Irene's sort of dignity and her grace and her sort of allure through this instrumentation. And if you have cornetti, I think it sort of alludes to her historical sort of lineage, and the clarinets possibly bring out her allure, different instrumentations to bring out different qualities. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that because a lot of the rest of the time it's very much a string sonority. There are oboes as well and very double on recorders, but it's often described as quite a claustrophobic drama. And the ending is may all live unhappily ever after type thing. But it's such a powerful experience, this opera. It really is. So in terms of my input, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, as artistic director, it's very important, essential to know about how to delegate, because if I try to do all these jobs, I just get nothing done. So we're blessed that we have a very strong and loyal team of volunteers and ambassadors and trustees who really keep the show on the road, quite literally. So with the stage director, it's what Dionysius has been doing so well is, helping in terms of choosing the production team. So as I mentioned earlier, he's chosen his assistant. Now, the assistant stage director in opera rehearsals is one who makes lots of notes. Whenever you print out a score for the production team, it's essential that you don't have music printed on every side of a page. You have to have one side blank and one side of music, because for every single page of music, they have copious notes about what the singers do where they go on the stage. So there's always a reference point. So when they come back to it for the next rehearsal, they know what, there's a consistency. And when productions are revived, that's seen as the sort of template, if you like. And Dionysius has also had vital input in terms of the lighting design, the costume design, of set and props, all those sort of things which are outside my field of expertise. Now, in terms of what CHOC, when I choose a stage director, or I should say we, not I, we always say it has to be someone who understands what CHOC is about. As I said at the very beginning, it's an opera company where we have this synergy between historical stagecraft and period performance. But that's not as conservative as it sounds. It's just creative. What we don't go for so much are the idea of concepts. So in the hope that some of you can come and see Tamerlano, there won't suddenly be an aeroplane flying in or a whale appearing on stage. There won't be these sort of things to grab your attention, because we trust that the music and the libretto will grab our attention. So that's not to dismiss the concept. Some of them can work very well. There was a production of Semele, which is it's an oratorio, but of Handel's Semele, where Jupiter was Bill Clinton and Semele was Monica Lewinsky. And that is, it's quite a powerful idea. And I think I didn't see it, but people who did seem to say it worked very well. So I'm not dismissing concepts, but we want to work with the music and librettos, so our production comes from that. So when I talk to the stage director, there has to be that common understanding. And sort of basics as well, we probably try and put, from now on, we didn't for Rodelinda, but I think what we learned with Rodelinda, it's useful to have an interval between acts, just to use of respect for the original structure of the opera. Now, one thing I'd like to focus on a bit more is the casting of singers. I mentioned it as a dark art. It's like sort of cooking. How do you put different ingredients together so they work creatively and well? Now, I've said already, I like to have a mix of ages, but you can't just go with that. One thing about singing is there's often a creative tension, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this, Claire, actually, as you're a singer yourself, between the prevalence for singing legato and the need to inflect musical lines in a Baroque tradition. I often say to singers who come around for coaching, saying, it's great you've got all this technique, but I'm sorry to say the audience aren't interested in your technique. We want to hear you inflect the line. And the challenge for singers, I think, is always, because singing, if I make a generalization, I think generalizations can be useful if we know they're generalizations. The aesthetic desire in Europe, at least, and I think America, is for beauty of line above all else. And so you get beautiful sort of bel canto arias, and it's wonderful for sort of Rossini and later on. It's a bit of a disaster for Handel, because if you just get a long, boring line, it's just a bit, well, it doesn't have to be boring, but it ends up being boring for Handel because there's so much inflection. So I always say to singers, you need to inflect, but keep, if you have to put it in a positive light. It's like saying, you would never ever say to a singer, sing without vibrato. That's sort of like red rag to a bull. So you need to find positive ways of saying to singers, inflect the line, respond to music. We want to hear your continuity of thought, not your continuity of line. And that ties in with why I think they have to work from a full score. So they respond to the instruments in the pit. It's a partnership. We are going for chamber music. It's not, I can't put up with divas. Life's too short. So I work with singers. We work with singers, myself and the stage director and maybe somebody else, to understand how responsive singers are in auditions. Because if you say to a singer in audition, do you like inflecting the line? Of course, they're going to say yes. And then you discover they don't. You're sort of stuck. So I always say to them, can we try this ornament here? Can you try inflecting the line there? How does this feel for you? Would you like to try it another way? Why are you singing it this way? How does this tie in with the character and everything else? And see how responsive they are. Make sure they sort of bring something to the table. Sometimes singers say to me, I want to be a tabula rasa and just sort of do with me what you want. And that's a bit boring, really, because I rather have somebody to work with rather than just someone who always, it'd be equivalent to having a conversation where someone just always agrees with you. And agreeing all the time is a bit, can be a little bit boring. Wouldn't you agree? Rhetorical question. Anyway, so singers have to have that mindset. And also, what's really important talking about ornaments is they have an understanding of harmony. Back in the day, in the 18th century, a lot of the singers, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Claire and David and anyone else, but I suspect a lot of the singers were trained and they could also play the keyboard and they had an understanding of figured bass and how the harmony worked. And that's essential. You can't just have these sort of random dissonances appearing in an ornament. So I'm going to sing for you in a bit and show you how I might ornament something, and maybe you can tell me what you like and what you don't like. So I like singers who are responsive to the harmony and the scoring and have their own ideas about music, but can also be flexible about changing those ideas. So you're not stuck with someone using fixed ideas. And then when I fix the continuo team, this is essential. So as I'm sure many of you know, the continuo team can comprise of various flavors in Cambridge Handel Opera for our production. So it's myself directing from one harpsichord. And as you probably saw in that video, it's another harpsichord. So it's nice to have that. It allows for harpsichord ping pong, if you like, having two harpsichords opposite each other on either side of the pit. And then alongside each harpsichord is a cello. And we also have a theorbo player. Now, I've been quite strongly advised that guitars weren't used in Handel operas. So we tend to sort of focus more on the theorbo player being a theorbo player rather than a guitarist as well. Discuss. But for now, it's theorbo. And that's the sort of nucleus of the continuo group. So two harpsichords, continuo cellist, and theorbo player. And it's essential that those people are people I know well, who I know can work with singers, breathe with them, and the important thing is as a continuo player, you never follow the singers. If you follow, you're late. You're being with the singers. And so they have to have a sort of physical approach to their playing so that when the singer breathes, they breathe. And then, of course, there's the leader. And one of the things essential for me with my relationship with a leader is it's someone who I can work with a long time beforehand in terms of marking up of parts. Marking up of parts is essential for all projects because it saves so much time and also creative energy. Because if you say to an orchestra, oh, in bar 14, can we have piano? In bar 16, can we have mezzo forte? In bar 19, we have diminuendo. You lose them. I mean, there are occasions where you need to have those sort of instructions and rehearsal, of course. But if you can get as many of those sort of markings done with your concertmaster early on, you can then focus your energy and rehearsal into much more creative things, like saying, okay, we want to have this color for this piano because this character is talking about their subdued anger for this character, or something like that. You can give reasons for markings rather than just making them passive. You can make them creatively engaged. I was speaking yesterday with my friend about the legend who is Carlos Kleiber, how amazing was it using imagery when conducting. And I think if you can instill the sense of the story of the opera with the orchestra, they will know why they're playing like they are, rather than just playing staccato because they've been playing staccato. They need to know that their aria is maybe about anger or frustration, or there's so many nuances, aren't there? So a leader relationship is essential to know that they are understanding your preparation for rehearsals. Moving on to the workshops, I mentioned earlier how blessed we are to have Dionysius working with us. As I mentioned, he's one of the real experts in period acting. And he's come up with some very powerful images in our workshops that I'd like to share with you. Claire, do you have them to hand? I'll talk about them as they come on the screen. Dionysius has been studying, he's read every treatise there is on Baroque gesture, and has understood how best to incorporate this into production so it's relevant for people today. So Claire, when you're ready, if we can bring some images up on the screen. Yes, so this is an image where, and Ruth, do advise me if I'm missing out some details here. These are what's referred to as very, very strong gestures. So using gestures to underpin the story. And what Dionysius does in our workshops, he gets us to, and I join in as well, to copy these emotions. I mean, if you all want to put your head in your hands like this, and that's the typical gesture of despair. All very human responses we do every day, but sometimes it's filtered out a bit. Actually, if you want to see real life gestures today, you just need to go to Naples, and you see all this. Naples is the home of Verismo, in my opinion. These sort of gestures, Dionysius has kindly let me use these images. They are from him. This is one of his things he uses in the workshops to share with us. Great. So Claire, if you move us on to the next one. Thank you. I'm very grateful to Claire for doing this because we had a dress rehearsal last night, and when I screen shared, my images came out minute, and everyone could also see my holiday pictures. So I thought I'd spare you the trauma. So gestures. And just while we're coming up for the next image, one thing I've learned from Dionysius is that I was just going to show you hands. There's a lot of people held their hands with these two things together, and these things apart. And I've been exploring about how this might translate into conducting, having a sort of a Baroque gesture for conducting. And actually, you can sort of see that hand gesture here with the gentleman on the right. On the right. You can see there's quite a sort of etiquette to these gestures. I haven't yet had a chance to talk to Dionysius about the history behind this one, but you can see that the way that the man is addressing the other person the gesture is just part of the language. And what we do, I mean, the danger of Baroque gestures, it can just become historical semaphore, and that's to be avoided at all costs. We don't want to give I think I should mention is actually we don't want to give audiences history lessons. We want to give them a dramatic, life-enhancing experience. So, and Dionysius is brilliant at that. So we're sort of learning the code in a way that we hope the audience doesn't notice it in a way. It's just a natural way of communicating. And you can see that here of a man just gesticulating to his colleague. I love where you can see the swords as well. Great, so thank you. Next one, when you're ready. Yes, and we've had great fun in the workshops doing different facial expressions, because I don't know about you, but it's very easy for us to sort of fall into a very small set of expressions. And I can't remember, but someone tells me, how many muscles does it take to smile? It's quite a lot, isn't it? And what we did is we sort of did these sort of expressions, we did surprise and we did these huge frowns, we just went to the extremes of each image, and you can see. Oh, very sorry. Oh, okay. I'm just looking at this post, which has come up in front. So yes, what you'll find when you look at the treatises, it's just festooned with all these extraordinary facial expressions. And what Dionysius did in the workshops is he got all the singers, myself, to explore lots of different expressions to see how we could liberate our faces in a way so that when it came to performing the music, one would naturally accentuate the story with a suitable facial expression. I don't think we've got anyone growing a beard quite like the gentleman on the right there in our production, but it's quite a fetching image. Great, thank you. On to the next.
Those are all the gestures. I think the other one I have is the costume.
Oh, yes, if you could share the costume, that would be
Right.
great, the stereo, because it just give a flavour of our production and how we came up with this idea. Or, well, I can't take credit for the costumes, but I'm happy to. So this is Asteria, the daughter of Bayezid. And what we've gone for is timelessness in our production. So we aren't necessarily going for a sort of fully Baroque production. The reason I say that is if you go fully Baroque, you need to spend an awful lot of money on wigs and the exact type of fabrics. So these are more generic in a way, but you can see the sort of long flowing garments. I think having strong colours is very important. Having reds works well on an opera stage because it stands out. It's a noble colour as well. And it also is I can imagine it being a costume which is easy to sing in. We don't want people to be sort of straight jacketed or anything else, or God forbid wearing a corset, as a lot of singers did in Baroque times. These are flowing garments which allude to grace and nobility, and I do rather like that drawing. And when you see, in the hope that some of you might come for production, it won't be like set in a very particular year. It's more about historical flavour, if you like. And you can imagine in that costume, you can also make your gestures very easily. The fabric isn't weighing you down. I remember speaking to a violinist actually who was playing for the Handel House Museum, or Handel and Hendricks as it now is, in Brook Street. And when they opened the museum, he had to dress up as Mr. Handel to play the violin, and he was given some what are considered to be Baroque clothes. And he said it was very interesting playing in them because there's so much more weight in his arms. It sort of made his tempi slower and gave more sort of gravitas to his sound. And there's probably a whole area there to be explored about period dress and tempi. But for the purposes of our opera production, we're going for more fluid fabrics, if you like. So that gives you an idea of the flavour. Thank you, Claire, for sharing that and helping me through my technical challenges there. Now, so yeah, I mean, that's very much Dionysius's department. I've given you a very superficial overview of Baroque gesture, and in the hope that you might be able to come to our Handel's Green Room, he will be able to share with you. Well, actually, for our first series, he went through a wonderful talk on Baroque gesture, and if you ever get to meet him, he'll be able to offer fascinating insights into this long and noble tradition. So, moving on to the music, which is obviously where I come in, ornaments and continuo playing. This is what I'd like to focus on next this afternoon. So, Claire, if you could be so kind as to bring up the music example I sent. I'm just going to show you an approach of how we go about. So yeah, if you scroll down, you get to see my hand. This is me sort of with my draft score, if you like, and tweaking the translation. But if you, thank you, Claire. So I should have said I was talking. If you scroll up a tiny bit, just so you can see the vocal line as well for beginning of the aria. Thank you. So this is Andronikos' first aria, My Beloved. And it's very interesting when you get a continuo aria in a Handel opera. By continuo, just the bass line without strings. It often suggests sincerity. And obviously this is, a love song of sorts. I'll first talk about the continuo and what we do with this. So we've got this bass line. Now, these first 3 bars open up at least 3 options, probably more, immediately. What do we do with it? We could just have it played on a Baroque cello, just alone, and then the singer comes in, and then the other instrumentalists join in bar 3. That would be one way of doing it. To bring out the sense of loneliness, perhaps. That might be a dramatic choice. Or the sense of searching, add your own adjective. That would be one option. Another option would be the realization. I'm sure I'm talking to an early music forum, so I'm sure I don't need to talk to you about the basics of figure bass. But if I'm saying anything which is double Dutch, do interrupt. So how do we realize this? And not if one way of me playing it, I'll play it now, would be this. So I fill out all the chords, mainly D major, and then in bar 2 on the B, I'm just playing a 6th chord, a first inversion of G major, then ostensibly it's D major. And that's quite a traditional way of realizing this. But the question is, that works fine, that realization, if I'm playing by myself, doing all the rhythms. But does it work so well when I'm playing with, if we assume all the team are playing, this would be played by, in my opinion, 1 harpsichord, not 2, 1 harpsichord, 1 cello, and theorbo. So that brings to mind one of the questions when you have dotted figures is, do I need to play all the notes if they're already being played by other people in the bass line? And the answer is, well, maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, another way of me realizing it as a harpsichordist, I'll play what I play. It could be just this. So the cello might be playing all the notes. If I sing the cello part and play what I might do, be dum da 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 dee, tim da 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 dee, da 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 dee 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 bum bum. And that gives a sense of vulnerability, perhaps. Not playing all the notes, I'm just tracing it. And this is something which works very well with theorbo players. They can give what I call a halo to the sound. They can just give nice chords. They might do, if I'm playing that and the cello's playing all the notes, they might do. And then end up higher. And that sort of thing can work very well. So we're myself and the theorbo player might be realizing the chords in a different tessitura. So I might finish the last chord there, and he might finish the third, just to give that sort of ring. And I often tell theorbo players not to stop the sound when they stop playing, because it gives a lovely ring, which sort of rings over into the second beat of the third bar. And by having this sort of contrasted texture in the first three bars, so to clarify, you've got the cello playing all the notes, probably hooking in the notes, so there's not too much definition on the small notes this time. If I do the bow stroke, I can't get my hand right. Be it's the other way around. I'll try and do the other way around. Be dum ba dee, be all hooked in. Dum da 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 dee, da dee dum ba dum bum. And then just separate bows of the cadence to have a tiny bit more definition. So there's that loose definition in the cello, me giving the outline chords on the crotchet beats mostly, and then the theorbo giving more or less minim chords. And that sort of mixture of approaches I find can be quite successful. I mean, of course, we're talking, there's so many variables, aren't they? I mean, if it's a huge opera house, if you're performing at San Carlo in Napoli, you need to play probably all of it, all of you, all hands on deck, just to make sure there's enough sound in the house. But in Malise, I can't remember the Ruth, can you remember how many Malise seats? It's only 100. It's only about 300, I think. It's an intimate venue, and you can play with this multi-textured approach. So that would be my approach to those three bars of continuo. And of course, there's the elephant in the room. What do we do when the singer comes in? Do we play the same line as the singer for myself, that is in bar 3? Some singers might get offended if you're trespassing on their line, and others might be quite grateful to have a sort of an anchor point in the pit. It depends on the singer and on the acoustic. But the questions I always ask myself with these arias is, how do I go above the singer's line? Do I stay below? Do I share? And I think it's a mixture. For me, at this precise point on a Saturday afternoon, I would be going, my beloved, mercy defend me. So what I did there is I kept under the parapet for bars 3 and 4. Then for mercy defend me, if you want a sense of to enforce the text, you can then go above the singer. You can go. So they go, mercy defend me, and I'm playing a third above them. Or if you wanted something more passive, you could go. You could stay below. And these are all questions which are answered in the production rehearsals, basically, because you know what Dionysius and I will explore during our rehearsal process, the rehearsal period is only about 2.5 weeks, which is very short for an opera company. We like to keep things fresh. Comes down to money. But what we'll explore during the rehearsal process is why the singer sings what they're doing. Why do they sing that line? Why is it set like this? And if it's decided that there's determination in the character, we might play higher. Has someone got their hand up? No, okay. Oh, sorry, yes, Ruth, hi.
Am I unmuted? Yes. Am I audible? Yeah. No, just before you leave this, which is all absolutely fascinating, and I've never heard you talk about this before, in your options on the first phrase before the singer comes in, it's a very distinctive ascending melodic phrase, which you have there, and the singer doesn't straight away. I mean, you almost expect that the singer will then reproduce that.
Yes.
But he doesn't. And so I wondered whether you take that into account, that this is such a distinctive phrase, agonizingly going up to that D. And it seemed to me in some of your examples that actually got quite buried. So I wondered, to what extent the actual melodic outline, something as simple as that, comes into the consideration.
Thank you, Ruth. That's a brilliant thought. Yeah, yes, it's totally true. The bass line in bar 2 realizes what the singer doesn't quite get. Maybe,
I don't remember the aria well enough to know if the singer gets it later on.
no, I don't think they do. I'm looking at it, and they get lots of ornaments written in, which is another issue, but not that this sort of sense of, dum da dum dee 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 bum bum. And of course, Bach does it in a harmony, doesn't he? Where the violin line is the embodiment of perfection, and the singer's striving to get to that perfection. So instrumentalists are perfect, of course. But you're absolutely right, Ruth. I mean, bar 2 is a realization. It's a fulfillment of the octave, which is like, the queen of intervals, which doesn't get fulfilled in the vocal line. So that's a brilliant observation.
Different people would have different responses to it, because to me, that top D sounds quite agonized once you arrive there, and then a very sudden collapse afterwards. There's a sort of reaching out, and then, oh no, it's all hopeless.
Yes.
And now how much one is influenced by what actually is going on in the aria, and whether you take into account what the aria is actually all about and what it's saying when you address the opening continuo line, or the opening ritornello, whatever it is. But of course, often the opening phrase of an aria by Handel does set up the emotion of the whole aria. So knowing what the aria is about can be quite important. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I'm so glad you did throw it in, because you've made me realise that third sort of phraselet in the continuo before it comes in could be much more strident. It could be, and then when the singer comes in, it could just be the contrast between the fulfillment of a bass line and the singer could be quite agonizing, couldn't it?
Well, that's an extremely good point, I think, because when the singer comes in, he's completely on his own.
Yes.
He's got no ground under his feet. It's unaccompanied. So there's this poor little voice saying, "Oh dear, I'm in such a mess."
Exactly. Yeah, it's brilliant. So I mean, it's brilliant. And actually, relating to Ruth's point, was the players knowing what they're playing. I mean, the continuo players see the text, but sometimes what I do in the orchestral parts is I write in the words that the players are doing, particularly here, my beloved. So they actually play but it tells you everything if you write in the words. And it's very important for string players, because as a director or conductor, it's very easy to forget that. The players just have one line in front of them. So you need to impart as much information as possible without them having their heads buried in the score. It's a fine balance. And another interesting thing about this aria, I mean, I'm focusing in details because I want to sort of show you, because give you an approach that I apply to all the music, is these very short phrases. It's broken up, maybe sort of, showing the despair. And the idea, singing my beloved, it just starts with this very fragmented phrase. And I often say to singers, one of the dangers of singing is that, present company accepted, is that people might over-breathe. That they're sort of, they're always told by their singing teacher, prepare, they have this huge breath for like a minute phrase. It's like sort of, they put too much petrol in the tank, quite literally. And it does have a dramatic effect, because if I make a sort of an exaggeration to make a point, if you come in that first phase, you do a whopping breath, and you go, my beloved. I'm not sure if that carried off on the Zoom, but if you have a big breath for a small phrase, for me, it doesn't show integrity of intent. And I often say to singers, come in on a stale breath, so that when you do breathe for a longer phrase in bar 3, it's got dramatic intent. So, for example, their first phrase, my beloved, it might just be we're witnessing their thought before they address anybody. So it could be, then just they come in, my beloved. Then they need to breathe. And by breathing, they bring in the continuo players again. My beloved, in mercy defend me. So I often say to singers, are you coming in on a stale breath or a fresh breath? I mean, that's very black and white, isn't it? But it's a point in terms of, we do this in everyday life. We sometimes speak and we don't always breathe before we speak, because if we did, it would be a bit odd. You know, if we every time we said good morning to someone, we went good morning, people would think we were a little slightly odd. So, you know, you probably say good morning. Oh, and by the way, did you get my letter? And then you breathe before you say the thing you want to say. And Handel does this all the time, and particularly in recits as well. He would say the word ma, but, and then he'd say ma, or povero mio, and then he'd come up with the thing that needs the breath in a way. So it's very important to match the breath with the emotion and the shape of the phrase. And sometimes just even saying match the breath is a disservice, because you just need to match the impulse, really. It might not even be a breath, because, you know, unless, you know, I can't think of a singer who couldn't sing that first, those first 5 notes without, you know, I can't think of a singer who would need to breathe and sing those 5 notes, is what I'm saying. I thought I'd just while we're talking about this aria, I thought I'd probably just share with you its Italian version, so you can tell me if you have preferences, because in Italian it's bella steria il tuo cor mi difenda. I'll just play it in Italian. I'm not a trained singer anymore, but just so you hear the difference. So we've had it as My Beloved, and this is an Italian version. Bella steria tul cor mi difendo, se tradisce. And it's interesting the different qualities the different languages bring out. We've got My Beloved, we've got Bella steria. And it's interesting, you know, when we do it in the Italian, we get this wonderful opening onto the F sharp with Bella steria il tuo cor mi difenda. And the interesting thing, I do try and always look at the Italian to understand what it's telling us about the music. And what the Italian immediately tells me about this piece is the tempo. Because in bar 4, you've got asteria, and then you've got a vowel elision. I'll sing it slowly. This is me singing to bar. You've got bar 4, you've got per asteria il cor. Sorry, I did it wrong. Per asteria il tuo cor mi difenda. So on that, I'm talking in details here, but in bar 4, on the second quaver beat, you've got Ria il tuo cor. Now, if that's sung too fast, I mean, this is Mark Largo, but if you go Per asteria il tuo cor, it doesn't give the flavour of the vowel elision that you need. So you've got Per asteria il tuo cor. So you need to give it the time it takes to fulfill the vowels. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the tempo for what works in Italian works identically in English. That would be far too simplistic. But I think there does need to be a knowledge of what Handel was setting, so that when it morphs into English, there needs to be the same sense of energy in the words. So the idea of opening onto bella steria, opening up onto the F sharp through the bella steria, and that vowel addition in bar 4, beginning of, gives an inflection. So it's my beloved. There's maybe the bella steria gives more care on the E. My beloved. So it's not my beloved. That'd be too jaunty. But my beloved in mercy defend me. So it's looking at all those details. And then I remember one of my teachers when I was a student saying to me, just be careful not to trip over twigs. You've got to sort of do all this and then forget about it all. Forget about it creatively so that you don't get caught up in all the details. But I think if you're aware of the details, it gives you lots of information. Is what I'm saying making sense to you? Or do you have any questions, any of you, or any answers would be great as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm showing you in detail my approach to continuo for and to the singers as well. And in terms of ornaments, I mean, this aria, I should have showed you next page as well, but it's interesting what Handel does in this aria, because I'm just going to play you what happens later on in the same aria. I'll play it to you just so you hear how ornamented it is. So he goes. And that, in a way, is a very ornamented line already. You know, dum ba da dum ba da 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 dee 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 dee. And what I sometimes do when I'm doing ornaments is sometimes do a sort of Schenkerian approach, and I sort of say, well, let's reduce it first. And sometimes in an aria, particularly if it's about an aria about forlorn love, it might be effective even to take out some notes on the da capo. So you might go. Or something like that. You can simplify it and just add slightly different notes. So ornaments aren't usually about adding things. They can also be about taking away and just giving a slightly sort of different view on things. It's, you know, there are different types of ornaments, aren't there? There are ones which are, you get some arias which are just like, you know, showbiz, you know, something like that. And you want to have lots of frothy ornaments, you know, maybe not always Joan Sutherland's ornaments, but that's another discussion. Or something like this, where an ornament is just like a little bit of salt. You just want to add a bit of something quite touching, you know, you don't want to make it too obvious in a way. So that's another sort of thing. So you can see how even just with this one aria, it's a sort of opens up lots of discussions. And it's vital that, you know, when I'm working with a singer, we have that sort of common intention behind it. And what I always say to singers when I'm working with them in a production is that I often say their breath is my arm, so that I am a conduit. I mean, at the risk of sounding a little bit pretentious, I'd prefer to be a conduiter than a conductor. Please don't remember that phrase, but the idea of I'm acting as a conduit between their breath and the orchestra. And these sort of broken up phrases, I mean, I wouldn't conduct this, doesn't need it. But were this to be an orchestra, I would just do very gentle impulses for the players, so there wasn't too much of a front to the sound. Good. Now, Claire's warned me, we've got a few minutes remaining, and I've spoken about my approaches to the music, the continuo, chamber concerts, on a sort of, I suppose, a few last thoughts to share with you before we have any questions, is the sort of markings I might put in the score in addition to the bowings. And one very important thing for me is making sure all the figures are put in the score, the figured bass. Not that it's over-figured, there needs to be scope, just so you know, you're agreed about where the dissonances are. I mean, theorbo players and harpsichordists don't need to do identical figures. I sometimes say, if I do a 7 chord, it's quite nice if the resolution is just on the theorbo. So sometimes the resolution in the harpsichord is too strong and it's just left to the theorbo. So those are the sort of discussions we might have with the continuo players, you know, who resolves what where. And it's not necessarily in the continuo team we all do exactly the same things. There can be a sort of fluid, sort of multi-layered approach to ornament, to continuo playing, which I think can be quite give more interest to the texture, if you like. Good. Now, of course, I mean, I have to say something obvious about operas, but I spoke right at the beginning that, you know, we need to agree the budget and the timing. And opera, as you know, is not a cheap enterprise. You need to have a large part of the budget in place before you start the whole process. And, you know, it's inevitable, isn't it, like all arts organizations, because of these very difficult 2 years. We've lost a lot of money during the pandemic. So, you know, we are going to be putting on Tamerlano next year, and we'd be thrilled were you able to come along, but we do have a shortfall. So we love opera, but love isn't enough. So, you know, be delighted if you might want to join our family of friends. So from as little as £30 a year, which would be more with gift aid, you can benefit from advanced booking and know that you'll be helping the arts to flourish. So, you know, if you want to talk to me afterwards or email me to find out more, please do. But it'd be great if any of you wanted to know more and join friends. You you can sort of hear about these chamber concerts we do in London and Cambridge. It's quite actually fun. We do these fundraising concerts in London at Stone House. Well, thank you, Claire. She's giving a link to the CHOC website and the video clip of Tamerlano in Handel's music room. But yeah, we do these wonderful concerts. Well, I mean, wonderful for me. These lovely concerts in Stone House, which is this Georgian gem in Lewisham, which not many people know about. So we do try and put on sort of different style events as well. So it's the operas are our main thing, but we do promotional concerts as well. Oh, lovely comments. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, it's always the sort of elephant in the room of opera. There's so many moving parts. It's Gesamtkunstwerk, but it's like a house of cards. If there's any one weak link, the whole thing comes tumbling down. You've got to have good musicians. It's got to look good. It's got to be lit well. You've got to have a good program for the audience. You've got to have a nice, strong education projects, and the thing needs to be publicized. Otherwise, no one's going to come along. And if any of those factors are removed, the whole thing just collapses. And so, yeah, it ends up being quite expensive. So my supporters can see me coming a mile off, but I'm working on behalf of CHOC rather than myself. I should have said CHOC at the beginning. This is what we refer it to, Cambridge Handel Opera Company. It's CHOC is how it's commonly referred to. But it's lovely, actually. I mean, I graduated from Cambridge University. And it's lovely I live in London, as I said, but it's lovely me sort of going back in a way to... there's a question. Can we see you on YouTube? I live the other side of the country. Well, we're going to do our Handel's Green Room online. So please do join us for that. Details of that are under the upcoming events on our website. So those will be streamed live online and recorded afterwards if you want to see them for the people who... It's quite a cheap ticket, I think. So please do join us for Handel's Green Room. It's chaired by Ruth, so we're very lucky. And yeah, we'll make a sort of short video of a production, as we did for Rodelinda, like a few, 7 minutes or so. So there will be sort of a legacy of what we've done. But we do find it, as I said before, it's a life-enhancing art form, and it's wonderful that there's this opportunity for us to sort of explore these works in a way that Handel might have recognized. I mean, it's probably good we don't know if he would have done or not. If we knew the answers, it'd be terrible. But, we work with the music and the libretto, and we try and see how the two work together. It's wonderful to see the rub between the libretto and the music, and they're equal partners. And coming back to what it's so good to be doing in Cambridge, all this sort of in-depth scholarship, it's wonderful to see how scholarship comes alive through performance. It's not a dry thing, it's a living, creative thing that we love to work with scholarship so that we can sort of perform to the best of our abilities, really. And the idea, I was speaking to Ruth last night, actually, we were talking about interpretation, weren't we? What is interpretation? And my view is one of, might be slightly different to Ruth's in a way, but my aim is that if one responds to what's in the music and really understands why it's written as it is, an interpretation will arise from that in a way. I mean, of course you need to make decisions, but the decisions are so embedded in your relationship to the music that you don't even think of them as decisions. They're just part of how you feel the drama comes together. And working with Dionysius and the singers is a great way to sort of, we're spending a lot of time talking and preparing for this in terms of sort of making sure we understand why we respond to the music the way we do. And that's not to say things are stuck in one way. One night I might play, and the next night, if I'm feeling there's a more forlorn atmosphere, I might just, we haven't got a lute stop, but I could go. Or I might even play up the octave. Another option, of course, is just to be playing by myself up the octave. And then leave a lot of time before the singer comes in. And when they come in downstairs, it heightens their sense of loneliness. So there's the fourth way. There's always a fourth way. So, it's wonderful. So when I talk about interpretation, it's never something sort of, there's no one interpretation. In my opinion, it's one's creative response to the music in any given moment. And in rehearsal, what I try and do is I set up a framework within which people can work. And then within that, we try and cultivate a sense of chamber music making on a sort of large scale. One thing I haven't mentioned, actually, of course, is ornaments and the orchestra, because it's vital. I've been talking about ornaments with the singers, but I think it's very important that the orchestra respond to ornaments with the singer. I don't think it works so well if the orchestra initiates ornaments. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, say for instance this passage. If it was played in the orchestra and the singer went, and the orchestra had an identical passage, they might go in response. So they're not copying the singer, but they are responding to them. And I often find there's a curious mismatch if it's a performance where the singer ornaments and the orchestra doesn't. And it might be a particular choice of the musical director, but sometimes I find it seems like there's a slight mismatch. So what we try with Cambridge Handel Opera is that there's a sense of, the orchestra responding creatively, not just echoing, but responding to the ornaments with the singers. So there's a sense of growth. I mean, it's an overused term, but it becomes more organic like that. That's our hope. Organic Baroque.
Right. If that's the end of your formal talking, we do have a few minutes in hand, so I'm sure there must be some questions or comments.
And do let me know if you disagree as well. It's more interesting if you disagree, within reason.
I mean, if I can start the ball rolling, I absolutely agree with you on this question of breath. It's something of a bee in my bonnet. I used to say that so many singers take what I call the European standard breath, but I guess now we have to just call it the British standard breath. No matter how long the phrase to be sung, it's always the same.
Yeah.
And that, apart from anything else, that has a deleterious effect on the tone, because if you're only going to sing 5 notes, then you've got to get rid of 2 enormous lungfuls of air. What's that going to do to the sound?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's like if you're pumping the organ bellows of an organ, apparently there's a fine art to it. If you over pump the bellows, the whole thing's going to go sharp. So it's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But the other string that struck me listening to this, and this is absolutely fascinating, is that this is so detailed, and presumably there isn't time to go through every page of music on the level of detail that you've talked to us. As you said, you're setting up a framework. So
yes.
So I guess you're relying on your musicians to sort of click into that, as it were, and then to do their own homework on their own arias or whatever.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Claire. I mean, what I try and do is set up a pattern for each aria, and then trust musicians, particularly continuo players who I will all know, that they will be with me on that. I mean, I work with continuo players that I've worked with before, but yeah, as you say, they wouldn't. If I did every bar like I did just now, we would never perform the thing. So I think you just understand the flavour of each piece and know, and then people who are conversant with Baroque style can take it on their own terms and then rehearse, so you can make sure that you've got the same intention, even if you're not doing exactly the same thing.
Right, anybody else? I don't think you need, Marilyn, do just chip in.
Yes, I was absolutely fascinated by what you were saying about continuo playing. I'm only an amateur musician, but you've touched on it now with Claire, but how you work with other continuo players. I mean, the other harpsichordist, does that harpsichordist copy you? Or do you know each other so well that you just fit in, that you're friends, really? How does it work?
Thank you. So yes, when do the harpsichords play together and when do they? I mean, I think for the fuller arias, we'll both be playing. Then for say like the overture, which is just really, which which Claire sent a clip of me playing. I mean, both of us will be playing that. But of course, if I need to conduct, I'll be conducting with one hand and playing with the other. So it's important the other player is playing. More generally, when does the other, I mean, sometimes people say, oh, I'll play with this character and you play with that character. I find that can work well for Monteverdi, I think. But I think for Handel, it ends up sounding a bit two-dimensional. What we try and do, we try and allot arias sort of between us and maybe match different moods or affects with the sound which our harpsichords make best. So the harpsichord I have is a very zingy Italian harpsichord, so it works well for quite forceful characters. Whereas the other harpsichord we have is Flemish, and it's probably better. I mean, I'm speaking a little bit simplistically, but it's more round and resonant and probably better for the more forlorn arias. But I do want to play My Beloved, so I'll have to find a way of playing my harpsichord quietly. But yeah, we try and mix it up so that there's textual contrast. And then a lot of the time we'll both be playing because it's, you know, it is literally continuo. And some people are of the opinion that both harpsichords played all the time. But by directing, stroke conducting, there will be times, you know, I will need the other player just to be playing while I conduct or direct. So it's a nuanced thing, but yeah, I will encourage them to play more rather than less.
I just found it fascinating what you were saying, and then working with a theorbo player as well. It's terribly complicated. I mean, you must need to put aside time to rehearse together, or don't you? Do you just do it?
No, we do a lot of time, and I'm encouraging the continuo players to come towards the end of the production rehearsals as well. The production rehearsals being rehearsals where Dionysius works with just the singers and myself. See if they can come along to that. I mean, we can't pay them for that, but it's hoped that they might come along just so we can start talking about these things early on. But this is where the figured bass comes in so importantly. If we're playing from figures which are not identical, but well, the figures are the same, but the realization of them can be different, and then that liberates us quite a lot.
Fascinating. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Marilyn. Yes. Hi,
Sonia, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Yes.
Could I ask a question about staging, which you haven't said much about? About 20 years ago, I saw a production of Tamerlano at Drottningham, and the music was lovely, but the production was terribly repetitive because it consisted of people running onto the stage, singing an aria and running off again. And it got very, very repetitive after 2 hours or whatever it was.
Yeah,
How do you get around that?
Yes, I mean, the challenge is with the dark opera aria as well, because you get the repeat of the bass section. I think we get around that by, as one of our trustees said so well, trusting the music. So I think it's, in my opinion, it's very easy to be too busy in an aria. And I think, I'm not saying one should do park and bark, far from it, but one should have a particular affect one wants for each section to reflect that physically, and then contrast that with the B section, but not, we wouldn't always be running on and off, but we would vary the body language for the different arias, and also the entries and exits, you know, having different characters on stage. And one thing we know about Handel's operas, they had a lot of crowd scenes where actors were on stage, and you know, they wouldn't necessarily leave at their end of their aria if it didn't say so in the libretto. So there would be variety in terms of their entries and their exits. So yeah, the repetitive quality of the music is a wonderful thing, but one needs to treat it with respect and understand why the music is being repeated and what that does to heighten the emotion. And I think if you work from the emotion, the staging comes from that, rather than trying to impose things on the music because it's repeated, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but that's my approach to it. It's interesting actually talking about stage directing, because of course the notion of a stage director is a modern profession. And Metastasio, for instance, you know, he directed his own operas. So it's interesting that we've got very used to the idea of a stage director when it's actually something which would have just been an extension sometimes of the librettist duty, which I find quite interesting. That's probably another talk, though.
Thank you. Any more questions before we finish? Yes,
Can I just
Venetia.
comment on language? I love the idea of arias being in Italian and the recits in English, because the recits is where most of the action takes place, and the arias are rather repetitive and fairly brief in terms of libretto. So as long as the audience got the text of the libretto, that seems absolutely fine to me. And just taking your example there, Bella Steria, I mean, Italian is just such a much more wonderful language to sing in any case. And however good the translation, it's never quite as good as the original. And just, I mean, on that technical point there, Bella Steria has its own note. It doesn't in my Bella Aved. So for me, there's no contest that you know, the Italian wins out.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's a lovely flavor. I love the Italian language. I mean, it is the language of music, isn't it? We're always aware with Cambridge Handel Opera of the original Italian when we do the translation. But as you say, it has its own musicality.
Presumably there is also a bit of an element of pragmatism here, in that perhaps some audience members are more likely to come if they think they're going to understand the words.
True, yes. And yes, thank you. And also, it's a practical thing about the surtitles machine. I mean, surtitles, it's a difficult thing to pull off well, surtitles, I think. They can be, but it needs to be very carefully timed so you don't get it has to marry up with what's being sung on stage, and having someone who can operate a good surtitles machine is quite a rare thing. And also it's quite, I find it quite distracting and to sort of look up and down all the time if you're looking, because even if you know the language, you feel you have to look at the surtitles anyway because they're there. I think what the Met does is quite good. They get the surtitles machine behind each chair and you choose your language, but they, for some strange reason, they don't have that at the Lees.
Well, if you go to the Millennium Centre in Cardiff, you'll get them in Welsh as well as English. So
yes,
that's
well, quite
extremely
right,
distracting.
Well, indeed, yes. Yeah, and then of course, yeah, which languages, where do you end? Yes, it's a tricky one. So, yeah, I mean, for practical reasons, it works for us in English at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I'm still wondering whether a macaronic approach might work. I'm in two minds. Part of me thinks it could distract the audience unnecessarily, but part of me thinks it could liberate us.
Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions, can I thank Julian very much for what's been an extremely thought-provoking, I think, talk. You know, I think we're going to be thinking about this for some time,
Well,
because there was a lot of meat, if I can put it that way, in what you've had to say. And I'm sure that we'll be looking at your videos and looking out for the green room sessions. I went to 2 of those last year, and very well worthwhile.
Yes,
so,
please do join us at Handel's Green Room, because I've really learned a lot from them myself. And we've got a whole variety of people talking for our next series, and it starts quite soon, doesn't it, Ruth?
The first one is the 16th of February.
Thank you, yes.
Yes, we haven't had any advertising material yet, but I'm sure it will come to those who are on the mailing list. And obviously I'll pass any information on.
Yeah, so, and do get in touch if you just want to be put on our mailing list. It'd be wonderful to have about what we do, and do speak to others about it. Spread the love. Yeah.
Julian, if I just say, I shall enjoy thinking of myself as the lipstick from now on, because I'm a brass player.
Oh, excellent. Well, yeah, lipstick's a good thing.
Yeah, there are worse things to be.
Yeah.
So many colours, aren't there?
Yeah, no, well, excellent. Well, nice to meet some lipstick.
So thank you very much again, Julian. That's been really interesting, and thanks to everybody for coming. And yes, if I could just remind you that on the first Saturday of February, which is the 5th, we're having a talk about the French Baroque by Richard Langham Smith, which also promises to be extremely interesting. There'll be more information about that coming through in due course.